Welcome to the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Davidson, and in this podcast, we'll explore the art and science of negotiation in real-world situations. Whether you're negotiating a business deal, asking for a raise, or trying to resolve a conflict with a colleague or loved one, negotiation is an essential skill that can help you achieve your goals and build better relationships. Through interviews with experts, real-life stories, and practical tips and techniques, we'll deep dive into the strategies and tactics that can make you a better negotiator. From understanding your own negotiation style, to reading body language, handling difficult conversations, and overcoming common challenges, this podcast will give you the tools you need to negotiate with confidence and achieve your objectives. So whether you're a seasoned negotiator looking to refine your skills or someone who's new to the game, join us as we explore the world of negotiation in real life. Today's guest on the Negotiation in Real Life podcast is Sarah Carthew from Human Link. Sarah is a coach and facilitator specialising in helping people and organisations during periods of transition. She regularly works in areas such as mindset, performance, purpose, strengths, leadership, and wellbeing. Sarah's passion is helping her clients realise their potential and continually grow. Sarah is IECL accredited and also accredited in values-based coaching. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It's my absolute pleasure to be here.
And I'm really looking forward to what we're talking about today, because a lot of my podcast episodes so far have been about the kind of technical aspects of the negotiations and, how to understand interests and how to understand what's going on. But today we're going to be talking a little bit more about the human element of negotiation, which I think is probably one of the trickiest parts of negotiation. And we're going to be talking with you about particularly values and how they play into the negotiations and a particular tool that you work with. But perhaps before we get into all of that, you might just give people a little bit more of a rundown on what it is that you do and how you do it.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So I am an executive coach, and I also coach non-executives as well and facilitate teams and in their organisational culture, team alignment, values, obviously, and performance. So we're a collective at the Human Link of behavioural specialists. So we like to see people bring their full selves to their work environment and make sure that they're leaving to go home as their full selves. So really acknowledging at the heart of it that we are all humans and kind of understanding the background and how that interacts in our work lives.
Fantastic. So value-based coaching, can you tell me a little bit about what values-based coaching is compared to, say, just general executive coaching? And what are some of the tools that you use?
Yeah, so values-based coaching, I guess it has its definitely similarities to coaching, but on the onset, it draws on, we use a tool, so Schwalm-Schwartz's values-based tool, which I'll talk to in a minute, to help the individual determine their underlying values, which are their underlying drivers, make sure that their goals are aligning to where they want to be. So often people set goals and they can't figure out why they're not achieving them or why they're still not happy. And often that's that they're not aligning to their true underlying values, which is hard to know unless you've identified them. So values represent what is important to us in life. They drive our motivation, goals, and life's highest priorities. So Schwalm-Schwartz is a social psychologist and a cross-cultural researcher, and he's the creator of the theory of basic human values. So through his empirical research, he identified 10 universal core values linked to human needs, so biological, social, and survival. But he also determined a way to consistently describe values by using domains. So coming to these conclusions was groundbreaking research, and identifying a common link between all values and recognizing that all values are ultimately related to what motivates us to exist and survive as humans is unlike anything anyone has done before. So we use a tool. This is now a gamified tool based on his questionnaire that he set out in 1992, his survey, and that's personalvaluesgame.com. So that's a way that individuals and organisations can do that. Individuals can do that free. And so those are the questions to determine your top 3 values, and that's really important to understand then everything else that can manifest from that.
Yeah, I love that. And then after we first spoke, I went off and did my questionnaire. Why would someone do the questionnaire? I mean, if you're, and particularly thinking of this from a negotiation and conflict lens, how is understanding what your top 3 values are going to assist you in that sort of scenario?
Yeah. So understanding ourselves pre-negotiation, or in life in general, but particularly in times of high stakes negotiation, is incredibly important, and understanding our drivers. The risk we run without understanding our own drivers is being unconsciously or unknowingly triggered. It's that the other party, our values may be evident to the other party and not evident to us. So once we can also understand our values and the language around different value sets, we can also then understand our party's possible values, or particularly if it was somebody that we've lived with, for a particular point in time, like a former spouse or something like that. Without drawing conclusions, you could maybe get an idea of their values and so their underlying drivers. So a way to reach the best point of negotiation. So obviously based on the premise that negotiation isn't adversarial and we're not splitting the difference, it's that we want the best outcome for each party.
Yeah, absolutely, which is always the way that I like to start the negotiation process. But I think that what you've really raised there is the important part, isn't it? So much of negotiation, particularly when we're talking about negotiation in the conflict perspective, so much of that is driven by different perspectives on how we see things. And this fact that, because our values are different, we automatically see things differently to other people who have different values. If we can begin to look at that, it really helps. And, I love what you also said there about you can't draw conclusions, but you can get to some assumptions about what might be driving them, because we can only see people's behaviours. We don't actually know really what's inside them driving them. And sometimes people act very differently to what their underlying behaviours are, because that's how they've learned that they need to behave in certain circumstances. Exactly. So I think that's all really good. And I guess it's easy for us to go online and play the game to find out what our own top 3 are. Perhaps it would be helpful to have a bit of an overview of some of the values that we are looking for in people, and maybe we can start to see, and perhaps there'll be some examples where I've seen these play out that we can share to sort of help illustrate this for the listeners as to how they might, what might they observe in others to get a sense of what their values might be.
Absolutely. So there are 10 values. So they are achievement, power, security, conformity, tradition, benevolence, universalism, self-direction, stimulation, and hedonism. And maybe we could go through would it be best to kind of go through each value and discuss how that might play out in a negotiation, or perhaps an example that we've had?
Yeah, let's have a look at what each of them are, and if one of us can come up with an example of how we've seen it, I think that would be really helpful for the listeners.
So the achievement one motivates us to promote personal success according to social standards. So it emphasizes ambition and the demonstration of competence. So what's important when I have value as an achievement is that and by the way, this isn't one of my personal values. I'll just be speaking in that.
Well, it is one of my top 3 according to the solution.
Actually, yes, it is actually. So this one is, everybody can want to achieve their things. So this isn't general achievement, but this is achievement by societal standards. So at this point in life, what does achievement look like? So achievement might be career success. It might be being a great parent. It might be, so all those things that society values, an achievement-driven person will also kind of value those same things. And it really emphasizes competence. So you'll see most people with the achievement value are very competent in the areas they are and have very high levels of ambition, so generally are successful at what they set out to kind of do.
So that's really interesting, because I think the way that seems to, suggest it would play out in negotiation is it's all about helping someone who is, someone who starts to talk about, but how will I look if this happens, or how will other people perceive me? It's recognising that saving face and managing to a certain extent ego, I guess, is one of the things that we need to be managing in the negotiation, to say, okay, this person, it's really important how others perceive them. And so we need to craft a solution that helps them manage those perceptions of others.
That is so, so true. And I think watch out for the achievement value that I've noticed when speaking to people about negotiation with the achievement value is their drive to win.
Yeah.
And just using that as a watch out, as a watch out, because what they might perceive as winning might not be winning for them. It might be the other party's lost. So, okay, the other party wants this. Well, now I know they want this. I just want to win. So that will mean them not getting what they want. So they take sometimes an adversarial approach to the competence value because I'm winning, and lose sight of what the best outcome of the negotiation might actually be.
Yeah, and I think being able to pull that apart for them and help them to understand that becomes important then. Yeah, fantastic.
And so the next one is the power value. So power motivates us to promote social status and control over people and resources. It emphasizes social power, wealth, and authority. So it's different to the achievement value in that it's not necessary to kind of demonstrate competence, and but it is important to appear to have a certain level of social status. So I think similar to this one, the saving face may be important, but also the feeling of being in control will be really important.
It's really sad, but the person who springs to mind immediately when you describe that sort of value is Donald Trump. And I think he's kind of the stereotypical person who it's all about being seen to be the one in control. And if you want to negotiate with him, and that being said, whether he is or isn't a sort of diagnosable narcissist, there certainly seems to be elements of that. And I get asked quite often, how do you negotiate with a narcissist? And there are some challenges around that. But a big part of it is actually letting them come out feeling like they've had victory and that they are the one in control.
That is spot on, absolutely. And it is that control over resources that power value likes. So sometimes this one will be quite direct in their approach to the negotiation about what they want. They might so obviously.
And would it be fair to say that this is the person who's less concerned with hearing from you about what's important to you?
It's only, well, if it benefits them to the extent of the social status and things. So I won't be listening for you. I'll be listening for me.
Yeah.
So there is that, what is it? I can't remember the kind of empathy that it's called, but it's an empathy often employed by, for your own means. So it's not empathy.
So it's almost like if it makes me seem more powerful to be seen to be kind and empathetic to a person in a particular situation, I will do that. But it's actually not for them. It's for the way that other people will perceive me.
Absolutely. Or if I can elicit what really matters to you by creating that space and having that empathy at that time, it doesn't mean that I won't use it for my benefit later, not necessarily against you, but for my benefit is the power. Because it could still be a mutually beneficial exchange. And it's just, I'll call out that the power value, one of the kindest people that I know and work with, he actually has the power value, interestingly, and he kind of explains it in that it is that need for control for resources, because he has a more clinical role and likes to do things in a certain way, and by no means is it that he wants to manipulate people or hoard power or things like that. So it's just for some people it's that sense of control, so they can have order, and then they might also to be supportive the higher good, but that's how it manifests.
Yeah, interesting. And I think that raises as well from what you've said there. I mean, I imagine with this tool, as with many other psychological profiling tools, there's no right or wrong about any of the different profile types. It's just that each one has its pros and its strengths and its weaknesses.
Yes.
And it's about understanding them and adjusting, not putting a label as good or bad on any of them. They all have both.
Absolutely. That is probably the most important thing with using this tool, that it is definitely neither good nor bad, and you'll get some really kind-hearted, incredible people with the values that we might not expect. They might have achievement, power, and hedonism, which are all the kind of self-enhancement or, self-focused values, but they might be incredible people, and we might also not even know that they have those values as their thing. So, yes, that is a very important call out, particularly as the names of these can seem a little bit polarizing or positive or negative. Yes.
I know. It was just interesting, isn't it? In fact, you've called out the hedonism. Like typically somebody would not want to be labelled as hedonistic.
Yes. Could be, they would say it's actually the fun one or the one that enjoys life, the hedonism value, but it just sounds so Epicurean that somebody's just sitting with a banquet in front of them with regard to everybody else around them. That's the image that I think that it conjures, but it's far from it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because to me it sort of conjures that person who's all about enjoying life themselves and perhaps not really worrying about other people. So to me it sort of almost has this element of selfishness. Is that part of it, or is it different?
That's the definite watch out of the value. So the kind of dark side and the watch out of the value. So when the hedonism value gets bored, they may pursue pleasure at the expense of other people or other people's pleasure or other people's well-being. So yes, but on the positive side of this value, they like to bring joy to others. So they get joy by bringing joy to others and lightening up the mood. So, at their best, they're cheering other people up. They're helping other people enjoy their life and remind them to have a well life and a fun life. Yeah. And at the darker side, if they are, if they do show more not selfish traits, but a lack of awareness of the dark side, they'll put themselves before others. Yeah.
So that's really interesting then. So is someone with this trait more likely to actually step away from challenging negotiations because it takes away from other people's fun? Are they more likely to be a bit conflict averse?
I'm not 100% on that, but what I do know is they will be the first one to lighten up the mood in the negotiation. Yeah. If it's getting too heavy or too serious, they'll throw in jokes there and talk about why it's so heavy, or come on, everybody lighten up.
Which is so important sometimes, just to change the dynamics. And I know that's happened to me in a number of mediations where, it's all been getting a little bit stuck, and then there's this opportunity to just throw out a lighthearted comment and everybody has a little laugh and you can just go, okay. And it really is a great skill for changing the dynamic of the room.
That is 100%. And that's definitely the areas of value. So they'll want to move things along. And if they find it boring, they'll be trying to just progress that along and not make it go for too long.
Yeah, I could have done with that today. I had a mediation that went for a very, very long time and did get quite boring.
Oh, we need to throw it in there.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to practice that myself a little bit. So what are some of the other, are there any of the values that we haven't touched on yet that are particularly relevant to negotiation or conflict?
Well, all of them are. So I might just really quickly run through it, a light touch all of them, and then we could discuss if any of the other ones have come through to you. So security motivates us to promote personal and societal safety and stability. So it emphasizes safety, harmony, and stability. Similar to security, but not quite the same, is conformity. So that motivates us to promote restraint and compliance with social expectations to avoid upsetting others. So it emphasizes adherence to rules, laws, and obligations. And again, that conformity value is motivated by a want to create harmony for a group collective. Tradition motivates us to promote commitment and acceptance of customs and ideas. It emphasizes the maintenance of cultural, family, or religious traditions. Benevolence motivates us to promote the welfare of people we are in frequent contact with, such as family and friends, and emphasizes caring and dependability. Universalism motivates us to promote understanding, appreciation, and tolerance and protection of all people in society. What's really important to this value is equality and justice for all. Self-direction motivates us to promote independent thought and action. Stimulation promotes the pursuit of excitement and new challenges every day, novelty and variety. And hedonism we spoke about personal pleasure and enjoyment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a couple of the ones that sort of stand out for me as things that you might want to be aware of if you're going into negotiation is the conformity and tradition. And I think, when you're talking about those, I think one of the things that's really interesting is, particularly in the mediation space, what we're looking for, and in a lot of negotiations as well, what we're looking for is actually looking outside the square to go beyond the obvious solutions that haven't worked. And so we're actually looking to sort of dig a little bit deeper and be a bit more creative about, well, sure, these are some of the things that have gone on in the past. And I can imagine with conformity or tradition as a core value, it might be much harder for someone to be a bit creative, to do something that is perhaps untried or untested or just outside of the norms. Is that the sort of challenge that people might find?
Yes, definitely. With the tradition one particularly, conformity will take a little bit more because they care about the group collective. So depending on their relationship with the counterpart, the other party, they might be seen to bend a little bit more or really take a considered approach at what works best for both parties because of group norms. And so just depending on the type of collective, that's really important to them. What you might see with the tradition values, definitely that kind of reluctance to think outside of the box in the first instance, because that's not their driver or their motivator. Their motivator is to honour the stories of the past. And so you might see people with the tradition value bringing up the past a lot, and where that might be important is legacy. So if somebody is driven by their tradition value and they have a family business, for example, and a conglomerate might be looking to take over the family business. Well, I, the owner of the business with their tradition value, I'm going to want to feel that I'm heard, that my family's legacy is lost, and that the conglomerate is acknowledging what's most important to me, that my family stories and my family history. So no amount of money is going to be able to get me over the line if that's not acknowledged.
That's so interesting, because that brings me back to one of the stories of one of my earlier podcast guests, Tal Evans, who was talking about he was actually acquiring a smaller IT consultancy, and not so much a family business, but the person who was selling it, it was very much he was looking for this respectful relationship and this trusting relationship and, you know, recognition of the people involved. And so it was meant to be this beautiful kind of friendly transaction. And when Tal came in to do his standard due diligence process and come in and say, I want to check the books and I want to check the contracts and I want to check all of these things, it totally derailed the negotiation up front, because he saw this as an affront to the sort of background of this business and how well and how smartly it had been run, and it was almost like a challenge of his honesty as well. So that sort of feels like it sort of fits in a little bit with what you've been saying there.
Yeah, definitely that very close relationship that the owner had with the business and wanting to have its integrity in any way kind of undermined or questioned. And that's a little bit of a deviation to draw this line, but with the self-direction value, this often happens.
So I want to move on then, Sarah, and chat a little bit about benevolence, because once again, one of the things that I see is potentially people, and I wonder if this is one of their values that's driving it, but people who get taken advantage of in the negotiation because for the sake of achieving harmony, they will potentially give up on outcomes that are important to them. Is this the right kind of label to be putting on that, or is that, it sounds like that's also a little bit of the conformity as well?
Yeah, so absolutely. This will be in one of the circles that is putting others first in a way. And so we've got universalism in that as well. So universalism, benevolence and conformity. And so it could be any one of those. But one particular watch out for people that are high in benevolence is former relationships or current relationships with the counterparty in any capacity, but the closer, the more the watch out. So where this really plays out is in salary negotiations. Where somebody with the benevolence value considers whoever they're negotiating with or their whole organisation perhaps to be in their benevolence circle, and they might care about the kind of people and feel like that's taking something from them, or that whatever they have now is enough because they have their relationships. They don't necessarily need that salary. It might be played on to the extent that the organisation might be having some level of hardship somewhere. The benevolence value person decides to take that on as their own issue. Yep. So, the business is struggling. We can't really afford this level of pay rise at this time. Now, the power value, if the benevolence value was placed with the power value wouldn't be backing down based on that statement at all, and neither would the achievement value. But with the benevolence value, wow, something close to home is struggling. Maybe I need to pivot because they're important to me as well. So that's the benevolence. That's a watch out in that negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, as we go through these, I mean, one of the things that strikes me is with 10 core values to remember, there's quite a lot. Are there some shortcuts or quick tips that you can give people to help identify where they might quickly understand their negotiation counterpart and make some necessary adjustments or adaptations as they're having a conversation?
I think there are a couple of things. So the first thing is to definitely know your own values and at least have read the 10 values and basically understand what they say. And to get your family and friends to do the personal values game as well. This really helps because you understand these people well, you'll be able to see those kind of as a framework how those drivers play out. So that can be very helpful. And the other thing is to listen to language of how people kind of deliver things. So it might not be so obvious in a professional sense, but they might drop things like, oh, well, you know, kids are the most important at the end of the day. That's something that benevolence, you know, might throw away at the beginning of a negotiation. They've just received a call from the school and they've just made this flyaway comment, and they might, you know, that might be an example of a subtle indicator. Whereas one of the other values might not kind of say that. Or it's really listening to the types of language, and it can be hard in that professional sense where people are not speaking, but wherever you can, getting those slight cues, or asking questions about what people did on the weekend or things like that may also give cues. Now, not necessarily all marathon runners might not be driven by achievement, but how they get to their marathon running might be, or their why might be, as particularly if they're competence focused or if they've got targets, which achievement people values love. So I went for a marathon, I ran this and I ran it in this many minutes, what might be the language of an achievement focus. Whereas if I'm not achievement focused and I went for a lovely run. I felt really energized for it. And it will just be different language. Might be the same.
Yeah, some people will be like, oh, I went for this run. It was so good to be part of the crowd and I really enjoyed being part of this whole thing, whereas others are just like, I just liked being in my head and focusing on the outcome. And I love that idea of what you've said about, you know, getting family and friends to do it and then talking about it with them, because I think that's probably the greatest way of actually starting to visualise some of these connections so that you can make some fairly confident assumptions about people. But of course, with negotiation, you know, assumptions are the biggest derailers of negotiations out there. So it's always important to recognise that you are working on an assumption and be prepared to flex if it appears that assumption is not correct.
That's exactly right. And I think kind of what we said at the beginning of the podcast, knowing our own is the most important. So kind of making the unconscious conscious, so you have a bit of power over it, and so you know your own weak points and nobody's going to drive that for you, but you are the driver. So my values are self-direction, benevolence and universalism. And so if I feel that there might be a deal that might play to what get me over the line is, we're going to donate 10% of the takeover, or we're going to give 10% of this to charity, and I have another party who's not doing that, and I might forget the whole size of the pie and just remember that that's a really large size of the pie, even though it's small, as somebody said, charity. Really, the most important thing to remember is values are intrinsically linked to our emotions, and we know that emotions in any negotiation can really make or break and come through and drive our actions. So I can be triggered in that point in time, but I'm aware that universalism is my value. So right now I'm aware that an emotion has been triggered. So I need to take a step back because an emotion has been triggered before acting.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, isn't it? It's about, you know, these are things that are ingrained, but knowing that they're there allows us to pause and take that time to reconsider in the bigger picture. So I think that's really important. And I share 2 out of 3 with you because I'm self-direction, achievement and benevolence. So there you go.
Exactly, yeah.
Almost peas in a pod.
Exactly. And they're great values. Can I just say? No, they're all great values. The self-direction one is really interesting as well because as self-directed people, we like to be running the show or feel like we're running the show and not to be kind of managed or told how to do things. Just tell us what you need and we'll get there in our own way. We'll get there. But let us do it our way. So that's an important thing to remember in the negotiation, that if a self-directed person feels like it's taken out of their hands, they'll quickly grab at straws to take a hold of it again, even if it's to their own detriment. So they won't want people speaking too much for them.
Well, this is really interesting too, because I always talk about the concept of needing to manage a negotiation and not control a negotiation. And so it's about, I think, people, particularly if you've got that self-direction value, it's about recognising that you can be managing the negotiation even though the other person looks like and feels like they're in control. If what they're doing is the way that you would do it anyway, then you're actually successfully managing the negotiation by allowing them to do it that way and not stepping in to take away their sense of control. Because if that's important to them, you want them to believe that they're running the show and that they're in control. But if it gets to a point where what they do no longer works and isn't the way that you want to run it, then you step in to try and change the direction. And I think that's a really important thing. Well, I think we could probably talk about this stuff for ages, because people are fascinating and people are a central element of negotiation. But in respect to our listeners, I won't keep you for too much longer, but can you just remind listeners again how they can get on and do this profile for themselves, and any other ways if they wanted to get in touch with you and talk about this further, how could they do that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicole. So this is the personalvaluesgame.com. It's a free online tool based on Shalom Schwartz's survey, so that everybody can do it on there. The 10 universal values, I highly recommend it. And please feel free to reach out to me as well if you have any values-based questions. We run values workshops at the Human Link, and I also do values-based coaching. So my email is Sarah, SARAH, @humanlink.co.
Fantastic. And I'll put your details and your LinkedIn profile in the show notes as well. But thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, Sarah. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me. And just before I go, congratulations on your 2022 Mediator of the Year. That shines through. So
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. That's all for this episode of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and learned something new that you can apply in your own negotiations. Remember, negotiation is a skill that can be developed and refined over time, so keep practicing and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us on social media or email us directly. And if you liked this episode, please leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. It helps us to reach more people and continue to produce high-quality content. Until next time, keep negotiating in real life.